Good evening, everyone. I'm Ellen Cole, and I'm going to be opening and closing the program this evening. Thank you, Michael Davis, for the music, and thank you to the WordWorks for sponsoring our program. The program this evening is going to be moderated by Barbara Goldberg, who is the Cafe Muse translation editor and a distinguished poet and translator. The readers this evening are Mojda Bahar and Amelia Parenteau. Our tech wizard tonight is Henry Crawford. We encourage you to buy our poets' books tonight. I also want to ask you to donate to Cafe Muse if you can. And that information will also be in the chat. During the reading, you may use the chat to comment or ask questions that our readers may answer during the question and answer period, which will be moderated by Barbara Goldberg if there's enough time. Our program will be 1 hour long. Audience members have been muted. This helps prevent feedback problems and ensures uninterrupted programming. Please bear with us if we do have a technical glitch. Next month's program will be on Monday, September 8th at 7:15 and will feature poets Nancy Miller Gomez and Sahar Maradi. I hope you'll be able to join us for this program. Before we begin, I want to say a few words about Barbara Goldberg. She's won many prestigious awards, fellowships, and honors, has taught in MFA programs at Georgetown University and American University, has been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Yaddo Foundation, the McDowell Colony, and others, and has published numerous books of her own poetry, books of translated poetry, and has edited a number of anthologies. Her work has been published in many journals, including Poetry, the Paris Review, the Harvard Review, and Best American Poetry. So I'm honored and very pleased to hand over the mic to my friend, the illustrious poet and translator, Barbara Goldberg.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Ellen. I'm so glad to be called illustrious any day of the week. I just want to mention that I'm the translation editor of the WordWorks International editions, and I guess I've been doing this for about 10 years or so, and over that time, I've selected books to be published in where the poets have been Kurdish, Croatian, Uruguayan, trying to think of all the ancient Greek. Anyway, you get the idea. I kind of like going for, some work that's off the radar. Not that anyone tonight is off the radar. I want to introduce tonight's readers. I'm very excited about it because we're doing something a little bit new. Mojda Bahar will read first, and she has translated from Iranian poetry, Persian, contemporary Persian women. And she's going to read from that. And Amelia Parenteau is going to be reading, she's going to be reading from theater. So that's different from what we've done before. And I imagine there's some unique problems that you encounter in theater that you wouldn't elsewhere, like maybe pace of voice and stuff like that. So she's translated work from Francophone African countries. And tonight, I believe we're going to hear something from Namibia. So without further ado, let me just introduce Mojda real quick. The only person I know who has 3 graduate degrees in all different fields. One is a JD from University of Maryland, so she's a lawyer. the Carey School of Law. Her MA is in French from NYU, and she has a BS in chemistry in French from Dickinson College. And she's translated a lot of Iranian poetry. So go ahead, have fun.
Thanks, Barbara. It's wonderful to be here with all of you tonight. And I hope that in the next 17 or so minutes, I can give you a little bit of an overview of the contemporary Iranian women poets. I'm first going to talk to you a little bit about the history, about 2 or 3 minutes. Then I'm going to talk to you about the title of the book, The Song of the Ground Jay. And then I am going to read some of the poetry. I'm going to read all of it in English, maybe one of it in Persian, so that you just hear the sounds a little bit. So Iranian poetry has a long history. Since the 10th century, we had the first poet in Persian language was Rudaki, and his contemporary was a woman called Rabi'eh. Neither one, we don't have a lot of the poetry of either one left, though we have much more of Rudaki than we do of Rabi'eh, the female counterpart. What's interesting is that literary historians have counted about 8,000 male poets and 400 female poets during the last 11 centuries. This is not only because there weren't as many women poets at the time, but because even if they existed, they were marginalized. The reasoning for that marginalization is, societal pressures, patriarchy, and a whole host of issues, one of which was marriage and the reluctance of some of the men to have the women publish or talk about or write or perform their poetry. So we are not left with as many of those women that have written poetry throughout history, though there are some that we can name. And you can imagine 400 to 8,000, it's quite a difference. And even in anthologies that were written by contemporary literary historians, you have a whole number of, hundreds of male poets and maybe 3 or 4 women. So I would like, as an Iranian, as somebody of Iranian heritage, to have the voice of those women who have been marginalized and driven to the margins to be heard, at least through their contemporary counterparts, and for folks to know that the poetry remains well and alive in Iran. And I think one of the contemporary poets says it best in terms of why they write poetry. And she says they forbade women from dancing, singing, being in love, kissing, laughing. Women retreated into their cocoons, and because they were lonely, many became poets. And in their poems, they danced wildly, sang, loved, kissed, but they didn't laugh. They cried. I think that's a very powerful poem, but I also think it's a symbol of why women wrote poetry. And most of the women I have translated, the book covers 104 contemporary women poets, and most of them that I've translated write in free verse rather than the classical Persian forms. The classical Persian forms are very well structured, are very well prescribed. And I think, to be honest, I think that the movement of women writing poetry in free verse is kind of a rebellion against the classical form. It doesn't mean that they're not women poets that write in classical form. It's just not as many of them these days. So that's the reason that I wanted to introduce as many of them, and I captured 104 of them. And I want to tell you a little bit about my selection process. I started with about 400 women. I read 1 or 2 poems by each. I could get hooked to some of the poems and not so much with others. And I thought that as a translator, I can't do a good job if I can't relate to the poem, right? I needed that connection. And I'm really curious to actually hear from other translators if they have that need. But I personally have the need to be emotionally connected to the poem before I feel like I can do a good job translating it. So basically, my guide was my heart. This is not a class, this is not an academically driven anthology that it's around a particular theme or other than the era that this woman wrote in. There is no commonality, right? So this is all women that were born post 1941. So that covers the Pahlavi regime, arguably the most, the time that the Iranian women were most liberated. And then also through today and under the current regime where they have been suppressed in ways that you have all heard from. So probably the most restrictive of times for Iranian women. So it spans the most liberated and the most restrictive times in their lives. And I wanted to make sure that I showcased not just the Persian women poets that are known to some, right? So for example, we have translations of Furuq Farrukhzad by Michael Hillman, by other scholars. We have translation of Simine Behbahani by, among others, Dr. Farzaneh Milani, but there are not that many of them that have been translated. So I wanted to basically offer an anthology where people could leaf through and say, you know what, this is one I relate to. And you don't have to relate to all 104 of them. But I hope that everybody will find someone and some poem in this book that they can relate to. So that was my process of whittling them down and looking at them. I also eliminated those that were so heavily contextualized historically that they would be hard to translate, meaning that the cultural significance was not one that was easily translatable, right? And probably not as significant to somebody that is not Persian speaking, but not only Persian speaking, but very familiar with the culture as well. So those I stayed away from. If I thought that the cultural context was such that it would hinder comprehension or that would require many footnotes, I tried to stay away from it. There is one of the instances that I'm going to read where I actually kept it and kept the footnote, but I will give you my reason when we get to that poem. So I called the anthology The Song of the Ground Jay. You might wonder about what does a bird have to do with 104 contemporary Iranian women. Iran is a country that has many native plants. But in terms of birds, there's only one or two native birds that are native to Iran. One that's endemic to Iran, its name is Iranian ground jay, or the Latin name is Podosis palesci, and it's a sand-colored bird of the crow family. And it lives in the desert. And it camouflages, basically, it's camouflaged. The coloring is exactly the color of the sand of the desert. It's a very understated bird if you look at it, but it has some amazing features. Though it's sand-colored, when in flight, it's majestic. It has white and blue and black wingtips. It also has particularly muscular legs. We don't associate muscular legs with birds. And though it can fly, it prefers to run. So it's a little bit of kind of an oddity. It's not exactly what you would expect a bird to be. But for me, it's a symbol of Iranian women. It's understated. It has to, for its survival, adapt to its environment. Yet it distinguishes itself through its song the same way probably these women distinguish themselves through their poems and poetry. So with that, I'm going to just read some of them. I have chosen the poems that are on the shorter side. And I'll tell you, as a translator, I think that translating short poetry is much harder. You have to be so much more economical with your words. And the other thing that I have always found fascinating is everyday words are harder to translate for me than heavily connotated literary words, because the more erudite words, right, the more scholarly words, we don't have that many equivalents for them in languages and generally speaking. But the everyday words, we have many equivalents. So it's harder to translate. And therefore, if you have everyday words in the context of a short poem, your job is that much more difficult. So at the beginning of each of these, I give basically very few facts about these women's lives. So I'm going to read that to you before reading the poem. This poem is from Mahnaz Badihian. She is a translator as well. She was born in Isfahan in Iran. She is a dentist. She has an MFA, and she's a translator, artist, and a poet, and has 2 poetry collections. And here is the poem. I wish I were like a bubble, taking flight with a hint of a breath, my heart turning into a pure drop of water with the slightest sigh. This one is from Maryam Ishaqi. She is a pediatrician and poet. She was born in northern Iran, and this is the poem. My homeland is your embrace. Beyond the borders of your body, they speak a foreign language. This next one is from Bita Malakuti. She was born in Tehran, has her BA in dramatic arts, and is a writer, researcher, and poet. This one is called Balloons. Exile is a place in my country where the balloons are not reminders of birth, but the juvenile banter of death. This next one is from Shayda Mohammadi. She was born in Tehran, has an MA in communications and a BA in Persian language and literature. She's an author, journalist, and a poet. I feel blue, like Friday afternoons, and death shuts the mouth of my ennui with a kiss. This one is from Gila Mosaed. She's one of the permanent members of the Nobel Literature Prize, and she has many works both in Persian and Swedish. Every day the woman would wash the clothes, sweep, iron, wash the dishes, and every evening into a glass with a lid would sing in a language no one understood. Then she would close the lid, go to bed. She was alone. The next one is from Ferishte Panahi, born in Tehran, is a computer scientist and a poet. The scent of petunia from a neighbor's porch, giving me the cold shoulder. And the last one is from Mandana Zandian. She's a physician and a researcher and a poet. I'm going to read you the Persian, and then I'm going to read you the English. کلمات زنده اند، نفس میکشند، خواب میبینند، عشق میورزند و مثل درد در کمرگاه مرگ میپیچند و جان میدهند و شعر میشوند و میمانند. ما تنها نیستیم، پرندگانی سرگردانیم که از خواب کلمات نمیپریم. Words are alive. They breathe, dream, love. And like pain, they encircle death and gradually die and become poetry and stay. We are not alone. We are wandering birds who will not awaken from the dream of words. So those were the poems that I had selected to read for you. I'm going to turn it back to Barbara.
I just want to say the language is so beautiful, very melodious. And what I forgot to say is the book that will be coming out this year from the Word Works, the one I chose actually, is by the poet Hafez, who's another Persian poet and totally different. In fact, I really enjoyed hearing how the differences are. He's so much more philosophical and I shouldn't say this, but Rumi-ish.
Yeah.
Anyway, Next, we're going to hear from Amelia Parenteau, and another unusual background. She's a writer, French to English translator, and theater maker based in Washington, D.C., whose work explores the intersection of art, culture, and social justice. And she went to Sarah Lawrence, and her publications are in American Theater Magazine, Asymptote. I've seen it in print a million times. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Asymptote, is that right? She's a board member of Fence International Translation Network and a member of ALTA, American Literary Translators Association. And I don't know if it was clear from the beginning, but this program is also co-sponsored by the DC chapter of ALT, American Literary Translators. Anyway, Amelia, you're going to be reading your interesting work starting now.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for the introduction, and thank you all for having me here this evening. It's a real honor to be a part of this evening's lineup. So I will be reading an excerpt from a play that I translated by a French playwright named Penda Diouf. And I was commissioned to translate this play in 2020 by Florent Mass, who runs a French theater festival out of Princeton every fall. And as it was the pandemic in 2020, Penda performed a pre-taped version of this as a one-woman show, basically, for the festival that year. And my English language script was available for those who did not speak French to be able to follow along with the performance. So I thought I would introduce the piece by reading part of the introduction that accompanies it in Judith Miller's anthology, Contemporary Francophone African Plays, which it was published in last spring, which will give some important context to who this author is and how the piece itself develops. Born in France in 1981 of an Ivorian mother and a Senegalese father, Penda Diouf has asked for and obtained Senegalese citizenship. She now belongs officially to more than one country, making concrete a feeling of doubleness she has harbored most of her life. She writes plays to confront her feelings of estrangement, especially as a Black woman in France, and she has co-founded an imprint, Texts in Liberty, to promote emerging young writers and a better representation of diversity in theater. In 2010, she went alone to Africa in her quest to understand and articulate what it means to be Black in France, and to respond to the absence and gaps in the history books she read as a child, books that taught her little that would explain the troubled relationship between Europe and the African continent. Like the biblical prophets, she sought a desert to find herself, where even the sand dunes would speak. Her destination, Namibia, was a relatively new nation, colonized by both Germany from 1884 to 1915 and South Africa from 1915 to 1990, the latter imposing its rigid and inhumane system of apartheid on Namibian peoples until they won their independence. In Tracks, Trails, and Traces, an auto-fictional theater piece, a genre edging toward performance art, especially when performed by the author herself, an African-descended young woman living in France remembers. In remembering, she reconstructs a self and a self-history. She does so while reflecting not only on her own childhood, but also on the country of Namibia and the genocide of the Herero and Nama peoples that took place in the early 20th century. In the course of her Namibian voyage, she will not be a tourist, but rather an empathic mind and body, identifying with Herero and Nama prisoners as they became the first victims of the fascism and diabolical experimentation that, once moved to the European continent, evolved quickly, resulting in the equally unforgivable and devastating Holocaust. Diouf structures her storytelling as though it were couture, stitching together fragments of her life with the story of the German colonization of Southwest Africa, the colonial name for what is now Namibia. The intertitles, punctuating each segment and running through her piece, described the act of sewing. Assembled at the end, they constitute a poem which binds the work, just as the assembled parts of her double story reconstruct a whole. So I'll stop there to move on to the piece itself. which is a play titled Pistes, which I've translated the title as Tracks, Trails, and Traces to try to encapsulate the several meanings that are within the French title itself. And just a note to say, it was mentioned in the introduction as well, but this text is supposed to be performed by a Black woman, which I am not. So please just take that context as we move into the reading. So I'll start by sharing the prologue from the French version, followed by a longer excerpt of my English translation. So, prologue. Te souviens-tu des dunes? Te souviens-tu des dunes de Namibie? Te souviens-tu des dunes de Namibie et de roulis de sable sur le flanc? De la mélodie de le flanc? De l'aine des dunes de Namibie, d'où s'écoulent des graines de sable, égranés un à un, roulant sur eux-mêmes. Précipités dans les chutes de reines vertigineuses de la dune, ils broudent d'impatience de rouler sur le sol, loin de leur pointe d'origine. Un endroit d'où ils ne verraient plus, d'où ils ne verraient rien, car leurs yeux ont tout vu et leur rétine a brûlé. Ils chantent leur complainte dans un ruissellement tantôt féerique, tantôt maléfique, dune mugissante. C'est la complainte du grain de sable rôti au soleil, dans le désert du Namibe, qui roule, qui tombe, qui chute. Ce sont les pleurs sans larmes des grains de sable, témoins des morts millénaires, témoins des corps décharnés, de la soif, de l'oubli des autres continents. Ce sont pour les corps pris au piège allemand que les grains de sable, égrenés par le vent, hurlent leur douleur. C'est le blues de Big Mama, dont les côtes pleurent ses enfants morts. Le désert du Namibe, malgré la signification de son nom, bouclier, n'a pas suffisamment protégé. Pour la première fois, ordre est donné de n'épargner personne, hommes, femmes et enfants. À l'intérieur des frontières allemandes, chaque héros, avec ou sans fusil, avec ou sans bétail, sera fusillé. Je n'accepterai plus ni les femmes ni les enfants. Je les refoulerai vers le peuple ou ferai tirer sur eux. Telle est la parole que j'adresse au peuple héros. Le grand général de puissant Kaiser von Trotta, également surnommé le Requin. Sous ce soleil radieux, dans ce paysage lunaire, désertique, tellement beau que les larmes viennent, des hommes sont morts. Des hommes sont morts. Seul le minéral se souvient. Le grain de sable qui cherche à fuir sa réalité, ses yeux, ses sons. Il se souvient et se sauve. Il chante. Et quand tu viens, touriste, dévaler Crazy Dune, batifoler sur les flancs rouges de Big Mama, surfer sur la coupe répandue, n'oublie pas le chant du grain de sable. N'oublie pas ce cri muet de l'abandon, de la tristesse et de l'oubli. Ce chant du siècle dernier qui résonne encore aujourd'hui. So I will now continue with the English translation, picking up from the very same place, the prologue, which is the beginning of the play. And as Judith described in the introduction, and as you'll hear, the author in French alternates between this large historical context and her own very personal history and her own stories from growing up. Prologue. Do you remember the dunes? Do you remember the dunes in Namibia? Do you remember the dunes in Namibia and the sand swaying on their slopes? The song of their slopes? The lap of the dunes in Namibia from which grains of sand stream, falling one by one, rolling over themselves? Hastily from the vertiginous small of the dunes back, they burn with impatience to roll on the ground, far from their point of origin. A place where they will no longer be seen, where they will see nothing, because their eyes have seen everything, and their retinas have burned. They sing their lament in a flow as enchanting as it is baleful. A howling dune. It's the lament of the grain of sand roasted in the sun in the Namibian desert, which rolls, falls, and tumbles. These are the tearless cries of the grains of sand, witness to ancient deaths, witness to bodies emaciated by thirst, by other continents forgetting. The grains of sand, felled by the wind, wail their sadness for the bodies caught in the German trap. The slopes cry Big Mama's blues for the dead children. The Namib Desert, despite its name meaning shield, wasn't protected well enough. For the first time, the order was given to spare no one: men, women, and children. Within German borders, every Herero, with or without a gun, with or without livestock, will be shot. I will no longer spare neither women nor children. I will drive them back towards their people, or I will shoot them. This is what I have to say to the Herero people. Von Trotha, the Supreme General of Kaiser Wilhelm, also known as the Shark. Beneath this radiant sun, in this lunar desert landscape, so beautiful it brings me to tears, men are dead. Men are dead. Only the mineral remembers. The grain of sand that tries to flee its reality, its eyes, its senses, it remembers and escapes. It sings. And when you, tourist, come hurtling down Crazy Dune, frolicking on the red sides of Big Mama, surfing on her rounded knoll, don't forget the song of the grain of sand. Don't forget the silent cry of abandonment, sadness, and neglect. This song of the last century that still rings out today. Seams. I have always been fascinated by marks on the skin. Wrinkles, scars, scarification, tattoos. Marks formed by time. Wounds. Those caused by others marking the body, opening it up to the inside, forcing the skin, penetrating it to form cuts, lesions, cavities, crevices, cracks, slits, dents, wounds, scratches, tears, gulfs, breaches, orifices, holes, gaps. A gap. Two parts that belong to the same body, separated, like twin gametes. The same tissue, torn in two. Two who were only one before the impact, the violence of impact, the trauma of impact. The cut digs a well in the heart, a hole, like the kind dug to bury a dead body, a black hole, like a lost memory, silence of the mourners. I like cuts, what they leave in us, what they leave on us, what they say about us. Life split in two, at war, drawn together to make up. Two pieces of a puzzle that will never really fit back together. I like the work of sewing, the needle that goes in and out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in a slow, hypnotic movement, like a serpent searching an escape from its destiny who isn't able to help himself. It's even his essence to bite and bite and bite again and again. Bring two pieces of cloth together, patiently draw the seams that unite them. A work of art to make it discreet, invisible, as if the gulf had never existed. Surgery, a bridge. Bring the separate cloths of history back together, a patchwork sewn with intimacy, and make a flag out of it, a bloody cape to show the world. Choose a thread of the same color as the cloth being mended. Thread, and follow the thread back through time. I am following my path, my instinct. Sometimes I walk into invisible walls, catch my reflection in funhouse mirrors, get lost in labyrinths, feeling my way towards the exit, blindly caressing the exterior of my prison, pushing the hood off of my eyes. The thread guides me through the darkness. Past the thread, through the eye of the needle. Children's games. Where did little Penda go? She who nobody still wants to play with, who's never in the center of games. She shouldn't take up too much space, shouldn't overshadow the heroes. At best, she endures it. Good versus bad. Of course, she's the bad. Or rather, she helps, she serves, the perfect foil. These innocent children's games surely prepared me for my adult life, always being on the periphery and the margins, but not showing myself. Certainly not shining. Not shining. The reproduction of oppression starts young, by imitation. And Mélanie in preschool, she's different too. White, of course, but with a speech problem. She leaves class early once a week to go to the speech therapist. She can't pronounce her cousin's first name correctly. Lui. Each of us being different, we're on the same playing field, that of the excluded. Even if the cause of my rejection is more visible, heavier to carry than hers because a doctor will soon help her pronounce Louis normally and rejoin the group, the clan. As for me, I will continue to advance in the court of miracles. Carnival. I'm 5 years old when I discover what blackface is. Politically, it is, of course, too early for me to have an opinion on the behavior. The preschool party is themed Africa. Not Mali, not Tunisia, not Ethiopia or Mozambique, but Africa. It's the 80s, even if I doubt that attitudes have changed very much since then. If they had, I never would have bought an educational sweatshirt that says, Africa is not a country. I was looking forward to the day. I thought since I was Black, I would be a little celebrated and honored. I would receive special attention that day. My excitement grew. 2 tables were set up to prepare for the show for the parents and the whole school. I hurried to the hairdressing table, already imagining the effect the wig would have on my face. My first wig. No, Penda, you have such pretty braids. Why do you want to wear a wig? I just want to dress up, like everybody else. It's true the wig was very ugly in retrospect, but I just wanted to look like the others. No problem. I'm going to compensate with makeup. I wait in line. All my classmates leave with charcoal black makeup spread on their faces, a toothless smile on their lips, proud of themselves. With their wigs a la Yannick Noah, they look like real little Negroes. And I waited. I waited to have my face smeared the color of charcoal, to look more like the representation that is made of me and my people, Negroes. And yet again, I wound up being denied. But no, Panda, you're already Black. Why do you want me to make you up? I just want to be like the others, to get dressed up. I want to have fun too. I understood that day what I was in others' eyes, a disguise. I was a carnival costume, a mask, something you can take off at night, you can wipe off to rediscover your true personality, and your white skin, of course. That day, everybody danced, laughed, shouted, had fun, and got dressed up. It was a party, a festival. We danced a farandole. I didn't have a costume. I showed up as if naked, with my everyday face, my hair braided by my mom, wearing the red tights everyone wore that day. I showed up the same way I was every day, holding my solitude with one hand, my strangeness with the other. The dark side of carnival gathered me in its arms. Childhood. I have a distant memory of the Christmas I spent at the hospital. I must have been 5 years old. My parents and I were eating in a big room where other families were also gathered. There was a small TV in the corner showing cartoons. It was the Disney Channel, Winnie the Pooh. I had come down with tuberculosis. A friend of my parents had given it to me by coughing. He died of it, the reason for his cough. I had just barely started being sick, coughing, blood. I went to the children's hospital a lot. For the rest of my life, I will remember the smell of the hallways, the sound of the doors slamming, and the pictures on the windows intended to cheer up life behind the partitions. I took a slew of tests. I fought, I shouted, I cried. It felt like I was on fire from the inside out. Back then, I'm sick and yet so courageous, so strong. I'm not afraid of anything. Like when I was in my 3rd year of preschool and we were visiting the elementary school, seated on the ground all in a row, scared to be in the big kids class, the teacher asked if one of us would like to recite a poem. I raise my hand and standing firm on my little legs, I recite, proud of myself, the last poem we learned in class. Who can tell me where that self-confidence went? I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Wow, that's really interesting. What I noticed is that at the beginning of your reading, things like dunes and sand and, became characters in and of themselves. I mean, they were characters. And then as it progressed, they joined the background. So I'm wondering whether people in the audience have any questions that they'd like to ask our readers, or the readers would like to ask each other. So how did you get to Namibia?
I myself have not traveled to Namibia, but Penda, who wrote the text, she did take that journey herself in 2010, I believe.
And my other question is the quality of the French spoken by, I guess, the people of Namibia, different from the French who live in France. I assume it's quite different, no?
So to my knowledge, French is not one of the primary languages spoken in Namibia, but Penda, being raised in France, speaks French as a native speaker, and so that's why the text was originally written in French.
Interesting. And Majda, how do you, when you talked about what made you choose the poems from the heart, and you also asked the question of whether other translators, and I think there are a number in this group, whether that's how they select, or is it on some other basis?
As in, do you need a connection to the poem to translate it, right? I don't know. That was my
I was
question.
wondering that sometimes the connection isn't there at the beginning, but as you work the poem, it kind of grows. I remember I was translating a poet who did a lot of landscape poems, which is not at all what I do. And I'm thinking, "Ugh." But as I went along, I kind of fell into the landscape myself. So as I worked on the poem, it became more familiar to me. I don't know, have others had any experiences they'd like to discuss?
So to your point, Barbara, sometimes I've translated a poem because it's a puzzle, right? Because it has many different ways of being translated. And I think I find those interesting intellectually, but they're not the ones that necessarily emotionally I connect to. But I can see definitely your point that, the more familiar you get with it, maybe it does tug at the heart at some point.
Well, I don't know if it's familiar so much as when you're translating. I mean, you're really living in it. It's as though you could have written it, maybe.
I'll say from my perspective, I have such respect and admiration for those who translate poetry, which is not something that I've attempted because it seems like it must always be a puzzle, no matter how much it appeals to you or not. Very challenging. And I have mostly been commissioned to translate the plays that I have, and that
They
means
find
that
you.
through various means. It's a rather tight-knit community, that of French theater translation. So the festival that I mentioned at Princeton, the Solensen French Theater Festival, is a really great hub for this work if it's something that people are interested in. That's every September.
Right.
But it certainly requires a connection, I think, that sometimes grows over the course of the translation project in order to really do justice to the author's original voice and words. And sometimes that access point is easier to find than other times.
For sure.
May I ask what the two of you, what your native language is, your mother tongue,
Mine's English.
and you?
So I learned Persian and English at the same time.
Bilingual,
Yeah.
truly. Oh, okay. Have you ever been tempted to translate from another language you know nothing about and work with someone who knows the language?
I have translated from French to English or Spanish, but they're not languages I don't know. They're
Right.
languages I know. But for example, I don't think I'm that courageous to want to translate a language I know nothing about.
Right.
Same.
Any other translators in the, where's Jonah?
Let me see if
Yeah.
ah.
Hi, Barbara. Hey, everyone. My name is Jonah. I'm with DC Alt. Thank you for this presentation this evening. I was kind of wondering about, so we have French and Persian. I'm also co-president of the Washington Writers Publishing House, and we just had our first really call for DC, Maryland, and Virginia writers, translators to submit a full manuscript from translation, and we opened it up to all languages. Initially, we only did languages that were in the DMV, but we opened it up to all of them. I guess Mojda, I'm not quite sure where you're located geographically, but Amelia, I know you were in the DC region. What are some ways in which you feel that the French and the Persian are significant and why they need to be translated and heard now, specifically from those countries?
So I think, as I explained in the beginning, I feel that in the US, we know of Rumi, we know of Khayyam, we know of Hafez, we know of on the women's, we probably, if there is a Iranian woman that we know in pop culture is Forough Farrokhzad, right? There are not that many folks that are known, yet it's a country that has 11 centuries of poetry, right? So it's great to be able to introduce the contemporary women poets to folks that are interested in poetry in the US. So for me, that's why it's important that they be translated. And I think that Iranian women have been very significant in trying to reclaim their rights, their very basic human rights. And, although we have heard about it, I'm not sure, there has been a movement. I think the poetic movement is one that we shouldn't forget as well.
And I would say that the works that I primarily translate and choose to translate are works from the Francophone diaspora, and particularly Black contemporary playwrights working either in France or in Francophone countries. And similar to Mojda's response, it just is a personal mission of mine to bring these voices and these perspectives that have been historically marginalized to a wider audience, to an Anglophone audience, and more centrally into our conversations and our political analysis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Amelia, that I think what brings what I've done in translation and what Amelia has done in translation is exactly the idea of giving voice to the marginalized, right?
Thank you. So I know, I don't know if anyone's going to Alta in, when is it, November, I believe, my first time going there. But I was wondering, like, how do you feel, in some ways, when you're translating from these marginalized countries or marginalized communities and voices, with, the complexities of gender and race, do you feel like you become sort of an ambassador to these countries in some ways, or what are the ways in which you feel that you're also highlighting the country in addition to the language and the individual voice, if that makes any sense? I will just give some background. I translated an author from Uruguay, and I didn't know much about Uruguay in South America. And when last year he came here to Washington, D.C., we did a little mini tour, and I also felt like I was promoting Uruguay, like, hey, everybody go to Montevideo, in some way, shape, or form, not to like, a huge extent I was giving out, pamphlets or airline tickets. But I'm just wondering what that role is, if you feel like that's part of the role of a translator and the work that you've done with these poets.
I'll say very much so, yes. Ambassador is a word that I use a lot. Particularly, the pipeline for getting work published, be that fiction or poetry, is different than the pipeline to get theater produced here in the United States. And getting theater and translation produced is extraordinarily difficult. There's only a handful of theater companies that are even interested in considering plays in translation. And I'll drop a link in the chat. I curated a series for HowlRound, which is a theater journal, last fall about this very topic and why it's important to have theater in translation and have access to it. And the perspectives that are brought into the conversation via having different artists' work accessible in English. But it's been a real pleasure of working with these various contemporary playwrights and representing them and their stories and their cultures. And for example, right now I'm working with a company that's based on Reunion Island, which is a tiny island off the coast of Madagascar, for those who don't know it. And he was here in DC for some partner production meetings earlier this year, and we had a lot of fun educating people about the marvels of reunion. So yeah, that's it's a lot of work, but part of the job that I really enjoy as well.
I mean, I would imagine theater is different because it takes so much money. You know, you publish a poem or a book and but with theater, there are all these other expenses. I mean, I wouldn't even know how you'd go about raising that money, but that's true for theater in English as well. I just want to mention one thing that might sound like it's not connected. Last week, I happened to go to Olney Theater here to see Cinetic. Have you heard of Cinetic Theater? It's a movement and dance and pantomime, no words. So they did Midsummer Night's Dream, which was great fun. But I have to say that a couple of years ago, I saw Macbeth. And I know this sounds weird, but I mean, I left the play and I thought I didn't miss not having words. It was so powerful with all that. So it must, you know, key into something very primitive. And I think theater does that. That's the point of it. So anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. We have one other translator that I know in the midst. I just don't know if she's going to talk. And that's Danuta. Danka.
Okay, I want to give my 2 cents. Majde was guest editor for a Persian language feature in La Craven Review, where I'm the
Yes.
poetry translations editor. So I highly recommend you guys look at it. She gathered several poets, and it's really, really very, very interesting, right? I also would like to take an issue with what Jonah said that, okay, in case of Namibia, that's true, but not in case of Iran, that it's not a well-known country. It's actually, you know, all over the news. So it's not like taking, you know, like Namibia, right?
I hate to stop the conversation because it has been so interesting. And Marcia and Amelia, those readings were beautiful. I can't thank you enough for sharing your work with us. And I was also very glad that you read in the original language as well, so we could hear it. That meant a lot. So thank you. Michael, I want to thank you again for your music, which as always was beautiful. And Barbara, thank you for leading this evening's program. That was fabulous. Also, I want to thank Karen Allenier and the WordWorks for sponsoring Cafe Muse, as well as DC Alt. And I would have mentioned DC Alt in the beginning, but I didn't know they were co-sponsors. So thank you. Thank you, Henry, for the technical magic. And to my fellow co-hosts, Claire McGough, Luther Jett, Henry Crawford, and Majda Gama, for doing all the work that goes into curating this program. Most importantly, thanks to you, our wonderful audience, for being here with us. We appreciate you so much. We wouldn't be here without you. You can extend your enjoyment by purchasing the poet's books. I hope you can join us for next month's Cafe Muse program, which will be on Monday, September 8th at 7:15, featuring poets Nancy Miller Gomez and Subha Maradi. Please make sure you're registered on our Cafe Muse website so you'll receive information on the event and the Zoom link. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. I personally recommend reading poetry instead of doom scrolling. And I hope we'll see you again soon. Good night.